Okay, hello everybody. I'll give it just another couple seconds to get a few more people in. Okay, so welcome to Inclusion as Competitive Intelligence, how industry, talent, and tech leverage DEI to become competitive. Welcome today, just a couple housekeeping items. For this webinar, you're going to be able, once we get to the conversation portion after the presentation, chime in with questions and comments. So you'll be able to unmute yourself, but if you have any trouble with that and you want to add a comment, just go ahead and raise your hand and I'll be able to unmute you as we have an opening in the conversation. You can also drop your questions into the Q&A box you'll see in your screen and also the chat box. So without further ado, I'll pass it off to Sherry Kappel, our evangelist here at Litera.
Thank you, Kim. So excited to be here. I have been looking forward to this session and this conversation with Julia for as many weeks as we've been planning it. My name is Sherry Kappel. I have been involved in legal technology for more years, more decades probably, than I want to admit. Nonetheless, I have seen the impact firsthand of having a diverse group of people support technology and champion technology to improve the quality of life of everyone working there, which of course means profit everywhere you turn. And so what I want to do is just introduce Julia. Here's how we're going to run this. Julia is going to talk first. She's going to honestly expand your mind and your heart and your awareness when you see these things all around you. And as soon as she is done, we're going to open it up and have this roundtable discussion virtually here. And we are so thrilled to be able to share this great topic. So without further ado, Julia, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Sherry. And thank you so much, Kim. Kim's done some amazing work in the background, and recognition is incredibly important. I am elated not only to come here and talk a little bit about this after about a little over a year being at Litera and being in legal tech for almost 4 years at this point, is to really work with Sherry. Her title, as you know, which is one of the best titles I've ever seen, is evangelist. And to give credit is that seasoned experience to be able to complement the conversation. And as we worked together to bring this to our industry, clients, employees, external, internal, maybe if you're not even in legal tech, we were hoping that this would excite thought leadership and critical reflection. Just a little bit about me is I've been in this industry of diversity, equity, and inclusion work, holding, at times many different titles, but all under this work, because we knew about 15, 20 years ago, I've been in this field. It wasn't always called diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sometimes it was housed under HR. Sometimes it was off the side of our desks, as a lot of people know. It was called global citizenship and equity in the education field, especially at Centennial. What I'm proud of, to be honest, is I've always been incredibly passionate about this. And over those 15 to 20 years, and working in private and public sector, some with unions, obviously, I've worked in finance, academia, legal, and customer service, and even now tech. And when you look at that, is how has it evolved so that it's the point where if we've missed out on the idea of what inclusion, and I'll tell you why I use the word inclusion, then we're missing out on being competitively intelligent. And I thought there was a great opportunity to not only talk about what people are doing in the industries and then our industry, but opening up and saying, and there resides some of the challenges of business, not only again in our customers and clients, but I invite everyone to be able to feel comfortable in what you want to share when we go to the roundtable conversation is, what has this sparked in terms of some of those challenges and what that looks like, and share with each other. So without any more further delay, inclusion is competitive intelligence, how industry, talent, and tech leverage DEI to become competitive. So I've been at Litera, again, I was going to say about 14 months. And what we did was last year around this time, I had a wonderful opportunity as a leader to be able to develop the strategy. And not a lot of D&I leaders get that opportunity to do that. It was a strong and ambitious 2 to 3 year strategy. And one of the things that I also got to do, being, having the opportunity and being very honored to have speaking experience, is that they invited me to the Unite Summit, which was everybody relaunching after a lot of different of collective. We're a highly acquisitive company. It was a new collective, and there was a lot of uncertainty and unknowing. And to be able to, on a Unite Summit, to have all 1,000 people at the time, almost 1,000 people at the time, come together and listen to the platform where D&I has a space to do that and champion what does that mean for our company now, was a really, really big opportunity. And I want to give you a little bit of how I took that beginning in terms of competitive intelligence and shifting the mindset. And I opened up with this quote. Adam Smith. If anybody doesn't know of Adam Smith, in 1776, he wrote The Wealth of Nations, and he talked a lot about the invisible hand. He's also known as what we would think of the father of capitalism. And as we know, with capitalism reduced right down to its very core is the idea of gain, supply, demand. And so if we have the demand for something, we create with that opportunity supply, and we have benefit or gain. And one of the things that was presented that I really find interesting is it is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from the regard to their own interest. In 1776, the core of capitalism was to create for gain. Supply, demand, gain. And that seems relatively simple. But what I'm going to share with you is the idea of what is being gained is now different and not as simplistic as supply and demand. 1921, a Johnson & Johnson employee had come up with an idea which was called Band-Aid. Band-Aid is still owned by Johnson & Johnson even now. And the reason why this came up and this invention came up that he came and proposed to the innovators there was because his wife was getting a lot of nicks in the kitchen. Apologize for the binary example, but it was at the time true. Came up with the example, with the innovation of wrapping around this adhesive, which had some medication on it to speed up healing because of all the nicks that were happening in the kitchen for different people working in it. And one of the things that took off, even though there were many iterations in 1921, was the idea that this is really important because there's a great unmet need. Now think about that. Nicks in the kitchen. Doesn't seem like a relatively big deal and quite common, but at the time, there was a demand. So there was a creation, and now we have benefit. Right? And it wasn't for the benefit of those people in the kitchen, but for the benefit of gain, of money, the commodity of it. So in 2014, Band-Aid, still owned by Johnson & Johnson, launched 5 different hour tones, they were called. You might have seen them. They're starting to get quite popular around, and I'm noticing them in pharmacies. And what they were doing was in response to 2014 is when they started to build it behind the scenes, but they actually launched it in 2020. And what happens is it was in response to George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, and the incredible outcry by the collective. And the collective is now your employees that said, we are looking for something more than a company. We're looking for a response to values in the external. And Johnson & Johnson launched Our Tones, 5 different colors. What's my point? You're talking about Black Wall Street, Black Panthers, Martin Luther King, that all happened as just one of the very few things when we look at racial inequity, right? That happened in those 100 years. And only now, from 1920 to 2020, 100 years later, only now, are you thinking there's an unmet need? Let me give you another example. Think about, and just have this number in your head, how many people have won the Nobel Prize? So the Nobel Prize, not Peace Prize, is for math, chemistry, and science. How many people do you think have won it? Just think of a number in your head. The very first one was given, I think, in 1901. So we're all in the early 19s here, but in 1901 to 1920. Think of a number in your head. Now assess if you think it's close to it, 930. So I know we're in 1922. So in 2021, so 100 years later, 930 have won it. Now I'm going to ask you a question. How many people do you think have won it twice? Think of a number in your head. I might ask you about this number later. No, I won't. 4 at the time have won the Nobel Prize twice. And if you think that even winning it once is incredible, think about winning it twice is extraordinary. And out of 4 people who won it twice, 1 was a woman. And in our industry, although it's expensive, we talk about STEM, it was Marie Curie, and she won it in 1903 and 1910, really testing my memory here. And she won 1 for chemistry and 1 for math. Sorry, see that? And one of the things that was interesting about it is how incredible this picture is, how dedicated she is when you're looking at that. So here, this was the 2014 I had brought up. In 2014, LEGO launched female scientists. So let's get this straight. 1903 and 1911. Now, if we look down at the bottom, 2014. What's the math on that? 111 years for the first. So you're talking about arguably 4 female, right, women's movements, industrial revolution that included that shift because of women in the workforce. Think about that. And only now, the right to vote afterwards, right? How many women we've seen even now in politics and making movements across. And only now do you see a great unmet need with LEGO? What's my point? Let me take a step back, and I want to use the word revolution very specifically because you're going to hear me use it. The word evolution refers to a gradual development or changes in something over a period of time. The word revolution means a turnaround, a sudden, complete, or radical change in something. We are at a time where diversity, equity, inclusion is a revolution that you must pay attention to. Why? Because if it was gradual over a period of time, it would not have taken 100 years for Band-Aid. It would not have taken over 100 years with all of the different events that have happened to get us to where we are now. It still wouldn't have taken them 100 years to only realize now is the time for a revolution for LEGO and female scientists. And the reason why I use this is a very popular view, especially if you're in tech, is looking at industrial revolutions and the movements. And we are, to me, even though people still talk about it in the 4th, but to me, arguably in the 5th industrial revolution. And if you read it here, it says responsive 21st century connection of innovation to purpose and inclusivity. This is the revolution. So in other words, and I've often said this in some of the articles I've written and whatnot, is tech is the center of the universe. I mean, it's not only that well-being has become, right, and disability. These are some of the things that have become really central, especially over COVID. But in other words, tech is not becoming archaic. It's keeping up with the evolutions toward revolution, so it's not going away. And that's why it is an integral part of the next revolution we are going in. Let me give you an example. During COVID, GM and Ford switched out pickup trucks for breathing machines. What was amazing about this is they took volunteers as well as their skilled workers who were already used to working on smaller technical machinery and actually switched out, even though it wasn't machine specifically, it was actually ventilators, because there was a need for ventilators at the time. They took the idea of saying, how are we going to keep and being able to sell this, by the way, because it was needed for, as you may have known, patients that were sitting around even in outside of hospitals where it was warm, even in hallways. And we saw that, look at that response. Not only was it agile, it was the idea of how do we need to revolutionize something? That's not gradual. Ford and GM are not known for ventilators nor medical equipment. So they radically changed to be able to respond. There we go. use design to fight racism. We look at science, technology, engineering, the arts, which includes design and math, right? And we look at STEAM as a more expanded understanding of especially our areas. But think about it, design in general. How do we use technology to open minds and change behaviors using even technology and design and racism now? You can see this here in the infrastructure. One of the things that caught me so off guard was the idea of a brand that swaps out their own profit to be able to build their brand better, but with inclusion. Does that make sense? Let me put it this way. Amazon does this, right? Amazon says, I'm willing to give away a piece of the pie, and we know about their model, right? They're not perfect when it comes to diversity and inclusion. We know about that in some ways, but they actually swapped it out and said, I'm willing to give away a piece of the pie to suppliers and third party so that we can offer a much more robust platform of products. So in other words, everyone will come to us as a one-stop shop. That's not very different than a lot of suites in legal, right? Or in legal tech is I want to offer the most products possible, so we're a one-stop shop. Well, this was a different way of looking at this. There's more to life than the Whopper. And during COVID, it says there's Roti King, Sultan's Palace, Tayyab's, Eco, Dumpling Legend, Oki, and it goes on. And it says, in short, there are many great dishes from thousands of restaurants that deserve to be as famous as the Whopper. As we head into tier 3 across more parts of the country, which was actually how people were referencing. I know every country referenced it a little bit differently in every area in terms of COVID and the restrictions. And they said, as we head into tier 3 across more parts of the country, it's clear independent restaurants need all of our support. They decided to give you a break from burger pics and make our Instagram available to all these restaurants. And they did. Competitive intelligence. Hopefully that's transformative in the way we have to think of things. This was actually featured, I love 60 Minutes, and I'm not sure if we get it everywhere that all of the participants are in, but we definitely get it in Canada, obviously the States. And one of the things they featured was Blue Dot. And what I loved about it was Blue Dot was actually the brainchild of Dr. Karam Khan, and he actually at the time was at the University of Toronto in Canada. And what Dr. Karam did, and I'm going to read it out because I want to make sure I get this right. I've read it out a couple times because I think it's fantastic. But Blue Dot in 2013, let me put this here for you. Just take a look at this as I say this. Blue Dot was established in 2013, so not around the time of COVID. Did we even think of COVID coming up? And in 2019, December, Blue Dot was alerted to a flu-like outbreak in Wuhan, China. The alert came nearly a week before the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the World Health Organization would raise the alarm. Blue Dot is a product of research into artificial intelligence and infectious diseases led by Dr. Karam Khan. Let me tell you what's interesting about what does this have to do with diversity, equity, inclusion? Diversity, and this is what I say, and not to be trite, it's not a boy-girl game. It's not a color of a person or ethnic race. It is way more than that. It is complicated and intersectional, okay? Dr. Khan deliberately used diversity and inclusion as competitive intelligence. How? By hiring engineers, ecologists, geographers, and veterinarians to work under one roof for 1 year, teaching a computer to detect 150 deadly pathogens. This could not have been as successful without multidisciplines working together and learning together. Although it was the computer that detected the virus in 2019, it was the teaching of it by a diverse group of skills that created this capability. This is fantastic. So bringing it to our workforce and customers, they have become the revolutionaries. I think Ernesto might be on this. He was a wonderful, wonderful panelist colleague and heard my opening when we were talking about it and discussing, and it was about D&I and how the landscape has changed. One of the things I said is pay attention to revolutions, because those revolutions are important to your employees and they are actually revolutionaries. And this is what I mean by that. The new realities of work, this was by Built-In that gave this. 48% of Generation Z are racial or ethnic minorities. Those are the people you were hiring. Those are the people that are reading your you're reading their exit interviews. By 2024, women are expected to make up 47.2% of the workforce. Millennials are 16% more diverse than baby boomers. Groups formerly seen as minorities, and minorities again is not only about racial ethnicity, right? Visible minoritized as well. It is equity-seeking groups may reach majority status by 2044. This is why we created this quote as a true teaser of what do we mean by that. 78% of employees say DEI initiatives are very important to them when considering whether or not to accept a job offer. Why is this important? We know the great attrition. The great attrition actually turned to, as we know, the great attraction. Now it's called, McKinsey, the great renegotiation. In other words, there is a war on talent, and they are revolutionaries, and they don't want to come if what you stand for is not what they see as valuable, because they have choice. They have choice. Understanding people has never been more vital in an age of rapid and unprecedented disruption. And we knew with millennials coming into the workforce at one point, maybe about, I would say about 8 years ago, they were about 67% of the workforce, and they were demand, highly educated, less experienced than what we were used to. So there was a generational conflict for sure in the workforce, but they were the ones that said, we demand value. We demand being able to be seen, work-life balance. This is all diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's articulated different now. Look at this when we look at the tech sector or legal tech even, right? Larger, but these are also platforms that we use on an everyday basis as consumers, right? Consumers of information and buyers of the product. Google's latest diversity report shows a jump in departures among women of color. That was just last year. I'm not calling out to be negative. What I'm saying is even when we're doing the best we can, we have to do better because we have to be competitive. We have to be courageous. Apple employees push back against returning to the office in an internal letter. Over the last year, we have often felt not just unheard, but at times actively ignored. Tech workers are no longer afraid to go public. Here's how they found their voices. In the Silicon Valley has a powerful new adversary, its own workforce. What did I say about the revolutionaries in talent? Dozens of Amazon workers protest outside Shakopee warehouse, demand time off for Muslim holiday. That was just this year. And I love this. I couldn't believe when I found it. We're hiring now, like as in right now. One of the things that I wanted to really bring our attention to just really quickly, and this is a little outdated, so I think 2016 it was, World Economic Forum had actually positioned supporting businesses change how they look at profit. Remember the invisible hand, right? The more there is of a want, the more there is that we can supply, and the more profit. It's not that simple anymore. Still economically sound, but what we're providing needs to be a lot more for people to be able to come to it. Profit to purpose, corporate policy to social responsibility. Standalone organizations, no. What are you doing in the ecosystem you work in, right? Employees and jobs are now considered people, work, and skills. Human-centric. We hear a lot of customer-centric, and customer centricity is incredibly important when you think about a stakeholder conversation. Do you know what your talent is asking for? Where am I in that? Because if people say, but my employee experience needs to be great for a customer experience, you're right. But if you haven't made the people a business priority, but what appears to be a stepping stone to customer centricity, we might be moving the dial, or not moving the dial where we need to. Workforce is an asset, not an expense. And we know this, right? Because we're starting to look at attrition. Attrition is a big thing to be looking at in any one of my industries, but especially in tech, because we have an incredibly naturally transient talent base. Forward-looking value metrics and looking at things on a generational perspective. So this is interesting, not always on a quarterly view, but the long game. And sometimes that's a little hard to do when we think about business. One of the things that I brought in that I thought was really interesting is we're hearing a lot about environmental sustainability and governance, so ESGs. And you see all the big players like Coke and Amazon posting this, L'Oreal, all different industries, pharmaceutical even as well, is where's our footprint, right? What's really important about this is not that this is one pitting against the other of environmental, social, and governance. But when I did research in all of the locations, I'm global, right? Litera is global. And I looked at all of the locations we were in. If you look at the bottom, it says personalized data by country or territory. I just wanted to share this with you because this is really cool. And I looked at, well, what are my countries of our locations that are looking, what's important to them? Do you know it was India, Australia, Singapore, UK, all of them actually rated at this time social factors as the highest of their interest. As the highest. What is the social factor? So right now, this is what they care about when you're even looking at a global company or when you have some locations or verticals that you're looking, supporting human rights, supporting diversity and inclusion of workers and staff, and supporting local communities. That was their top want when you're looking at of the factors. And you see a lot, you'll even see it in depending on what the industry in is, this is our footprint, or, this is our risk and compliance. Incredibly important for shareholders, right? For stakeholders, for clients, right? We're risk adverse in our industries. But what about the people working? They're looking for the social. DEI in 2022, Forbes said this is one of the top 15 skills employers are seeking. They're not asking for a D&I manager or diversity leader. They're saying we want every single person as a contender to have said, I have some experience with D&I. If you work in an employee resource group, especially at Litera, this is something that I really promote, is let me help you put this as a dimension to your portfolio on LinkedIn, because it sets you out separate from the others if you were going for another job internally or externally, because DEI is now competitive intelligence. And if I have a contender that's in project management but has contributed to the culture, the social culture, does understand what it means and keeps it as a passion to do so, and has worked in an employee resource group or has championed this type of work, I might consider them over somebody else. After the pandemic, and not only, we've seen the political global scale, even in the US, we've seen now civil strife internally, or we're looking at counter revolutions of women when we look at Maham Samni, right, in Iran, and we're looking at the war in Ukraine. These are all things that are global platforms, right? So it's not only COVID, but what it is COVID changed us. It is a unique moment to rebuild the world better than it was before the pandemic. I did not write this, but I love it. That means expanding our definition of value to include how well people thrive, the impact left on the environment, growing inclusivity, and more. And I'm just going to move this because I know I really want some opportunity for us to have some conversations. So I have a couple more to go, but just quickly, I wanted you to take a moment and think about it. A revolution has many lanes. This is the place for a revolution because it has been. This is a place for a revolution because it has been. This is the place for a revolution because it has been. This boardroom is the place for a revolution because it is. What is the intention? I did my postgraduate work on transformative theory of adults, and although that sounds very rainbows, it was the idea of how do we create learning so that it's transformative to when the rubber hits the road in this private sector we work in, right? Or even public sector. Learning is not the accumulation of knowledge. It is the building a capability to find new possibilities in novel circumstances. Sounds a lot like invisible hand. It sounds a lot like capitalism, but a different view of capitalism. It sounds a lot like supply, demand, gain, benevolence. Let me take you really quickly through, I'm not going to read all this, there's a lot on this slide, is what is the legal sector specifically, because now I'm talking about legal tech. And I'm saying, if these are your clients, then what are you doing if you think about what your clients are interested in? What the industry is now starting to shift and change, right? Investing in D&I opportunities and challenges for legal teams and legal tech. Look at this, Canadian View, Law Society joins the 10,000 Black Interns Initiative. And this was in England actually as well, but we have this here. If you look at Baker McKenzie, so I'm going to show you 3 top, very well-known legal. This is the very first slide. This is not private information. This is not behind the scenes. I don't have behind the scenes. If I go right onto their website, look what they care about. They're saying, I'm not going to attract any clients, and they're not going to believe in my risk adverse or that I get them or know what's important if we don't put it right on our main page. Clifford Chance, right on their main page, celebrating Pride. Applications now open for 22 Sustainability Development Goals Award. Can you imagine? Kirkland & Ellis, this is one of the biggest law firms, if not the biggest when I looked it up. The very first page, take a look at that. That is all ESG, leading our field, serving our world. And it says a social commitment. Inclusion is competitive intelligence. If we look at HG, which is one of our partners, obviously we're a portfolio company, what they care about, and this is just an illustrative, it's not to read into deep down into by any means, but you're welcome to do it. It's all external reports, is these are the 3 areas to drive and measure change in which they ask us to prove: recruitment, development, retention, and inclusive advantage. This is all about diversity and inclusion. What we've done is even in attracting in this last year, how are we attracting talent or even responding to the questions before they sign the offer? That's what we've actually heard as well. Recruiters coming to us and saying they're asking about our D&I work before they sign because they have other offers. Are you telling me inclusion is competitive intelligence? Yes. So we created this. The other thing was wonderful because we're looking at the product suites we offer specifically. So this is advice for anybody if you're not only doing it and saying, well, our clients are starting to ask, how are we using this particular product that we acquired, right? That's part of our suite, because they want to know, how do I find out the diversity of my lawyers? The reason why is their clients want to know if they're diverse before they even take them on. Inclusion as competitive intelligence. We needed to know that. Lawyers are starting to write about it, even though they're not social justice lawyers, but they want to be part of these conversations and the layer that says they are more. Listen, on the bottom, and I'll just be a couple more slides, LSO, Law Society of Ontario, ventures debate investing in a professional name reader to call the names of new licensees, because Canada, as you know, is well known for being diverse, being called to the bar. Names matter. We launched already, knowing this, for AAPI, which is Asian Pacific Islander Month, signature pronunciation capabilities for Name Coach, which could work with Salesforce. And this is not a plug for Name Coach, although they were great. It was the idea that we seeked out a vendor to be able to support celebrating the diversity of not only our clients, but our employees, and saying it is important for you to make people feel included by taking the time out to understand the identity that's in a name. Identity in a name. ILTACON just happened in 2022 in August. One of the major, this came back to me by several different people in my organizations, was one of the conversations of the panelists that said, organizations that both integrate quantitative D&I data into the organization and formulate it into a long-term plan will have a leg up. That long-term plan means D&I is a people priority. It is a business imperative. It doesn't just sit on the outside. Inclusion is market intelligence. Very last slide, or second last slide, is McKinsey, who's fantastic, said, how are you going to future-proof your company? You're saying, Julia, so what does that mean? I'm not going to start from scratch. There's tons of wonderful things out there to be able to do. What I think was important was one of this, because I'm about the people. What type of D&I leader am I? I'm not a higher diversity. I'm about building talent pipeline. I want them to stay and be happy and productive and psychologically safe. That means I have to care about the people that's in here already, right? So when we take all this time to get this war on talent and this great talent in, how are we helping to keep them by making them feel included, right? Treat talent as scarcer than capital. I'm going to let you watch this, and then we'll go to our roundtable. Oops. One of the things I wanted to ask before this, sorry about that, was the idea of what does COVID soda, Bluetooth technology have in common? Think about the idea of how, even in a tech company, what they're looking at was understanding the revolution of diversity, right? They're looking at inclusion and connectedness, and they actually put that together, working together. And that's why inclusion is competitive intelligence. I'm gonna pass it, thank you, over to Sherry and everybody else to be able to participate together. I hope you enjoyed that.
It, again, so mind and heart expanding, the entire, all of your comments and all of your examples, Julia, it is, we are changed. We are all changed. So I guess as we kind of begin this roundtable, I think we can just ask, how do we get our folks to show up on the camera, Kim? They just, are they able to just make the request, I think, or put something in chat maybe? Is that how we do that?
Just let me know and I can, I was hoping to see if we could, if people felt comfortable.
Yeah, if people felt comfortable to.
I was just saying people should be able to unmute themselves, but if you can't figure it out on the attending, I will just raise your hand and I'll unmute you guys.
That's wonderful. I think as we're waiting for some folks to do that, I think that the hiring and talent, challenge and the retention of talent, Julia, you raised so many great points about that. And having been someone who's been with an organization for a really long time, right? It's not to say that I've always felt safe or included. It's just to say that there was, in fact, Adam Smith's quote about the interest of the baker and the interest of it was the baker and who were the other examples? It was the baker and
the butcher and the brewer.
Sorry. The butcher and the brewer, right? And I think it's just this this interest in doing good work, and sometimes that's really what we all have to dig down and tap into. And I just think you've nailed it in terms of all of the things that become so important to people with an organization, that it's not just about it's about the world, really. And that's the kind of big takeaway I have from this. So is there anyone on our session who wants to raise their hand and join in this conversation? In your work, Julia, I guess I'm very curious how it is you began in this world, really. How did you begin to pick DEI as your focus?
This is going to really age me, which I don't mind, but it shows. But before it was even called diversity and inclusion, I mean, 20 years ago, you would hear about diversity and inclusion, but it really wasn't its own role. And so by design, watching Law and Order as I was growing up, thought, oh, I really want to do that because it advocates for the person. And it's
Right.
actually, I got through this through failure, which is a wonderful teacher. But the failure only meant, I was going into law and law clerking. I remember I got interviewed at Osgoode. Obviously, I didn't get accepted. And they asked me, what would you like to do? What are some of the shifts and changes that you'd like to see in this industry? And I said, I believe that justice is a commodity, and I'd like to actually govern and garner the cost of it. And they just took it back and they were like, what? Like, that's not really what we were asking. I could tell. I'm like, now is the wrong time to be in this conversation. And they were saying afterwards, when I had gone and had a little bit of conversation, they're saying, you're looking at social justice, which is a little bit different. And they didn't really have a course for social justice at the time. So through this
Right.
roundabout way, I fell into the idea. And that's why if you look on at my LinkedIn or whatnot, those roles that I held weren't always diversity inclusion. They were, within learning and development, but you'd be doing the diversity component. It was called global citizenship, that you'd be internationalizing a curriculum, but you were always within that, always doing it towards what does this mean for us to feel included, and diversity. So diversity was the really big thing. So I guess that's a little bit of a longer story, but it was kind of by accident. But then as we started to see this happen, especially in the academic world, we started to see banks and private sector start to take off on diversity and inclusion and having goals for it. And then me applying and saying, I want to go where the rubber hits the road. I really want to see what's happening out there in terms of their own. And I became more obsessed. Yeah.
And I think of our law firms as new business is being, is this a good fit for us, this firm, and all of the RFPs and things that go out, and the measure of tell me how diverse your legal teams are. And it's even more than that. They're working with the firms to make sure that there's measurable impact, because every customer isn't someone who looks just like them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's getting there, and we're focused on it, right? But I just think it's so important and as that slide said, every single lane.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, the revolution. There's this is a really great question, actually. So question came in, it's from Ernest, which is wonderful.
Yes.
Thanks for sharing your insights. Question, how do you actually sell? This is a great question. How do you actually sell the business cases for D&I internally, as many organizations are not really investing or ensuring there's defined budget to educate? And so one of the things is to make it important. In any and all of the organizations I've gone to in the companies, just because they're hiring or want to hear about it doesn't mean they're investing in it. So it's exactly.
Right.
And even having a one person, often you hear D&I leaders are exhausted or they have very little resources. One of the things is really smart to do is making the case for it where it hits the shareholders in the gut kind of thing. So being at the table or finding ways to understand what's the business challenge or the business problems. We know right now retention is it. And that's why I said really, I say it quite clearly is you have a retention problem. We have an attrition problem. And so those people that are leaving, where is the data? Who's leaving? Why are they leaving? Exit interviews, right? Where, if we're looking at being customer centric, or we want to go into certain verticals, what are those verticals where there's a gap? And the reason why I'm doing this is we have to do our homework and our work as D&I or the leaders that invest in it to make the case and say, we cannot keep the lights running when it looks at talent or on and running to respond to clients, right? To respond to the needs of what they need, even customer support 24/7. If you want to offer that, you better be keeping that that line of talent happy and engaged for a longer period of time than just 1 year, which is the normal kind of turnover time, 1 to 2 years before they want to move on to something else or get paid more or whatnot. So the point is we're saying, listen, if we need to be customer centric, we need to be incredibly employee centric. What does that mean? Investing in the reasons why they go and proactively changing that. And what you do is you cherry pick, because you're not the only people looking at attrition, cherry picking what's important for D&I, but they're not feeling psychologically safe. They don't feel that they could advocate for work-life balance, right? These are all psychological safety kind of tenets that drive inclusion. ENPS, a lot of net promoter scores, but employees, why? Why do you think they won't say, ask that question? Why wouldn't you reference this company? They're saying, well, it's a hustle culture, or I don't feel I have equitable access to growth opportunity. That's a D&I issue, but that's a business problem. They're not going to stay. So that's one of the things is get your hands on as much data, cherry pick what falls within a D&I and make the case. But you're making the case to the larger problem, which is you have a talent retention problem. I hope that helps answer. There's another question here. We started a DEI committee in response to the George Floyd murder. Yeah, we are still going strong. Oh, that's great. However, it's the same handful of people doing the work. What are some resources to get employees to want to work towards this endeavor? What a great question. This is always going to be something, even if they have the want to be able to do it. You sometimes have people who are like, I can't be bothered, but I'm really happy to hear that it's here. 2, you have the participants, and 3 is you have the workers, right? The ones behind it. Here's a couple of things, Mary, that I think does help. One is if you have the backing, getting an executive leadership committee together. So one of the things that I did was women in tech is a big, obviously, challenge to barriers, even when we do hire. What I did was I created a Women at Litera leadership committee. And even though it has all levels, it has to have minimum of 40% of leadership. So SLT and above, right? From VPs and above, I chair it. One of the things that it has executives that have skin in the game, who want to be there. But what it also does is have those executives sponsoring with their budget. 2, speaking about it, so it's not only you. 3 is inviting others to be able to come. And so what happens is now you're inviting different people who want visibility, who want an opportunity to lead and be seen, and giving them opportunities. So it's like people want learning and development opportunities. If you're part of the employee group, like I said, or part of these committees, how are we reciprocating as an organization or as a D&I leader something to give back to them where it's inspiring? I'll give you one more thing before I think there might be another question, but is we had a wonderful, wonderful DEI ERG member. She's still championing strong. I'm going to mention her name, Sabrina. And she's a manager of engineering. So women in a very non-traditional tech role, a manager of engineering. And she's a very big powerhouse in our D&I ERG. What we did was we supported her creating what she brought, which is cultural understanding and team effectiveness learning experience that we worked with her and with learning and development to bring for the organization. We're just actually launching it. We had a pilot group and a working group. We've made that example of her, and I'll tell you why. Because we advocated and worked with her leader so that it can be one of her personal objectives. It's one of her KPIs. She gets paid out performance based on what she brought to the larger organization. Obviously has to have some things around it to be able to be considered that. But when they start to see those examples of, wow, this is reciprocated. It's not just me doing something for my organization again where they're doing better. It's a reciprocated. We have to champion what that looks like right from the start. So I hope that helps.
I think so, and I think Julia, the woman at Litera, what has I guess it's been so rewarding to see is it's not just attended by the women at Litera, it's the allies to women at Litera, and even just learning, such a term and such a, put a face on it. It's really, really created such inclusive conversations. While it is without Bluetooth and a Coke, It has brought people together to
Yeah.
certainly meet from across the world, really, and in our organization. So kudos on that. So we have another question, don't we? This one's also from Ernest. He said, thank you. Based on your feedback, then, I think we could say many organizations don't really have a measurable strategy in place for DE&I. In summary, it's importance versus urgency. Urgency can only happen with the right stakeholders. And it's so true. That is exactly why the executive inclusion, again, use of that word, executive inclusion in our initiatives. They've got such skin in the game, and it really does make a huge difference.
Yeah.
Urgency can only happen with the right stakeholders.
That's right. And I think what Ernest is saying there too is that everybody's saying it's important. I hope I'm saying this right. We've chatted. He's wonderful. Everybody says it's important, but if it's not urgent, then it starts to fall by the wayside again. So D&I becomes wallpaper, right? And so the urgency can only happen with other people being able to also, who are stakeholders in the game, championing you. I had said this, D&I is not a one-person game. And when you are the only one doing D&I, and someone had asked me that in the Women in Technology, and I was like, let them read your exit interview. Let them read your exit interview. Why? I'm being honest. That is just not a game you want to do with one. He says, agree.
He says agreed. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that, again, I'm even witnessing within our organization the inclusion of many more conversations as we try to evaluate our priorities for tech. And everything has come up, Julia, from accessibility to the person who's more the tech administrator as opposed to the end user. Not to say that, to essentially say both are important. Both need to be included in this product, in this effort, because one, the users can't be users without the administrators. Right, and without the tech stakeholders who are the champions of the technology, you literally can't get it on the table or on the desktop. So it's, it's all around, and this awakening is, I don't know, is it that we've all been so patient, or is it just, again, the catalyst of the world? I think you're right about COVID having unleashed a whole lot of, what really matters, examination.
Right. And George Floyd too, right?
Floyd.
Yeah, I mean, listen, systemic racial discrimination and harm and violence is not new.
Yeah.
But for some reason at the time, this heightened consciousness became overwhelming that it was ridiculous if you didn't make a comment about it. If you were forgetting the communities that cared about it, and you didn't have to be from the Black community to say, why are we not saying something about it? Roe versus Wade. There was a point where the expectation is, why aren't we saying anything about it? Even as a Canadian company, you were hearing it from different people, not only global. This is what we're saying about the revolutionaries are your employees now. And so it's incredibly important to say, even when you're doing accessibility, let's test it out with our employee resource group, our committees, that may have some of those hidden unseen needs. Can you test it out and give us, a research and development moment, right? Giving those employees, Mary, again, that's back to that, which is making them feel that they're at the table and their voice is heard.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And I think to your examples of the firms that have front and center on their websites, establish their position on, we're with Ukraine, or celebrating Pride, really amazing. And they can now back that up with individuals within their organization who represent that. And again, a very, very positive step forward, I think.
Yeah.
And an acknowledgement that has always been there, frankly, but it just has been not as visible, I think.
Yeah, I agree. It's become like you have to make visible. The other thing too is that when you do make these comments, because you're saying we feel the need, to respond to some of the things that our employees care about, and if you don't create the narrative, they do, right? They will. And rightfully so, because they're saying that's ridiculous that you didn't. But one of the things that I said recently to a CEO I was chatting with was, what you have awakened, you must feed. And we have, and I actually have it in an article I want to write, but one of the things is, and we've seen this with the Black North Initiative, is a year later, all of those people who got on jumped on that bandwagon. The Globe and Mail in July 2021 said all of these companies have not really done anything to advance internally their Black community. And I was like, why would you go on it if you didn't plan to do anything about it? And what you have awakened, you must feed. Feed it from the internal. And when people feel overwhelmed about that, there's low-hanging fruit. There's ways in which you can support people. You don't have to feel overwhelmed. And the other thing, get someone who's not HR, right? HR is proactively and has their jobs, don't overdo HR and what their role is. They're there for a reason, but you do need a seasoned D&I leader. You do to be able to support you and champion and build trust with the executive and lead you down a right path and build integrity with your collective that says, okay, she might be doing something, about this. And that's what we've tried to do really, even at currently where I'm at, right? Is how are we building the trust of the collective first? That's important.
And so recently there were two aspects of our conversations unleashed at Litera. One was about those with, one might term it disabilities, but not. They have unique needs as individuals. And the sharing of that. Julia, can you just kind of share with our audience the sort of umbrella of that, what we discussed a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah, so just in celebration and recognition of World, it was both Mental Health Awareness Month, but it was also World, it's called NDEAM, and so it's Awareness of Disability, Employee Disability Awareness Month. And one of the things we did is we had just launched, we're very quite proud of it, it's called Accessibility and Inclusive Advancement Committee. And we have people from the community who have hidden and various disabilities, and they start to talk about, should we use the word disability? And unique was the word that came out, and this is from the community itself, right? And so we were talking about it. I have a learning challenge as well, and we were talking about what do we want to be considered? And if we say, well, if we have it as unique, then it positions it as a positive to invite to the table, rather than their disability. And we're not, some people were saying, let's reclaim the word. So I don't want people to get, caught up and immobilized by movement. We can do that. We can become so politically correct and mindful that become immobilized. That's not the role. We were saying, let's expand how people think about it. We had a wonderful, he's a co-lead, Mohammed, who's in a wheelchair, and actually was saying about, we called it Without Borders, and looking at excellence. And he actually does YouTube videos on, he's Muslim, and saying what happens when you pray and you're in a wheelchair. He plays basketball on tournaments and stuff. We were showing excellence as well. We're expanding people's minds in a very different way by the community and inviting them in. It was wonderful. And if Mary's still on it, he's a co-lead, an opportunity to be a leader, right? And so that is, must be a symbiotic experience that gives back to the people who are saying we're the only ones giving. I am 100% about dedicating part of my leadership to making sure they get something back in return.
Yeah, and I think the other one, which we won't have time to talk about because Julia, it's come to the end of our hour, but the other one is we've also spoken about ageism. Did you know 60 Minutes just did a piece on this on Sunday? And we did, and it's equally about mentorship and translating that into building back into the institutional knowledge. So we've got a whole nother series of conversations to have.
We do. I call it intellectual.
Okay. Exactly. So thank you so very much for what you've shared today, for all of your good work, for including everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. That was wonderful.
Thank you. Bye.